guys, welcome back to Medical Coding with Blue. Today's episode is all about how to study the ICD-10-CM coding guidelines. If you are brand new to my channel, welcome. I am Blue, I'm a medical coder. Okay guys, so one of the other more common questions that I get about studying is how do you study the guidelines? Now I've mentioned before about reading the coding guidelines in their entirety once per week. Now, the reason that I recommend reading the ICD-10-CM coding guidelines in their entirety once per week is because these guidelines are our compass. It is our constitution. It is everything to us as coders, because this is going to give us our direction on the appropriate sequencing of codes, the rules about the codes, and why certain rules apply to certain things, okay? So it's very important to know this. A lot of people want to skip over this part because it's too much reading. That's the field that you're getting into. You're getting into a field that is all day long. 90% of our day is reading. So that's the important thing. It is not, medical coding is not a data entry job. Doesn't matter who told you that. I'm telling you as a veteran medical coder that it is 90% reading. We are reading and we're making sure that documentation is appropriate and all the rules are followed and that kind of thing. And the best way for you to get confident and know those things is to read the book. Now, you can download these guidelines. Right now it's 2023. We are within a few weeks of starting the 2024 because October 1, the 2024 guidelines kick in. However, I will say this. If you are going to download them from the CMS website, just keep in mind it's like 120 some odd pages, something like that, give or take. And so they are the same guidelines that are in the books. Now, I am using the Optum ICD-10-CM Expert for Physicians. Now, in this book, it is 32 pages. And again, when you download it from CMS, it's like 120 some pages. It's just the spacing in between in the font size. That's all it is. So that's just something you got to keep in mind. It's the same guidelines. Don't worry. I've been asked that several times too. Is it the same? There's so much to it. It is. The thing about downloading them from the internet is that you have access to these guidelines anywhere you go. So you don't have to tote around your book with you or anything like that, or print out, a copy. You can just literally, be on your phone. You can look at them or whatever. If you're waiting somewhere, whatever, you got a few minutes, you can always continue to read. The thing about studying the guidelines is you don't have to memorize, okay? And a lot of people will want to put that on themselves. Oh, I want to memorize. But guys, you have to understand that these guidelines get updated every single year. Now, there's a lot of updates for 2024. I went to a class on that. And there's a lot of updates, but the whole gist of it stays the same, right? It's structurally the same, and you can look in certain sections and know where to find guidelines about injury coding, about kidney failure, that kind of thing. So you're looking through this whole thing, and you're just sort of absorbing where you can find guidance about a particular condition or sequencing when there's a certain thing. So that's the thing that you will know once you start reading these coding guidelines. You cannot go wrong reading the coding guidelines. And if you tell me, well, Blue, I already have so much to do. I'm studying this and I'm studying that. This is one more thing you can add in. You are allowed to add in when you're doing other studies, right? Like say, for instance, you are studying medical terminology and anatomy. It is always okay, even if you're in that beginning part, to take a break from that and listen to the guidelines for an hour, or read the guidelines for maybe 15 minutes at a time. Take a break, come back to it, another 15 minutes. You do that 4 times in a day, you've already got an hour in, right? And how fast can you get through in an hour? You'll be able to know that once you start practicing. But you actually have to start practicing, And so don't think of it as, oh my gosh, I've got one more thing I've got to do. This is going to be very beneficial to you. And it won't make sense. Like I said, it's very technical. It's technically written. These are written by doctors and scholars. So it is very technically written. It's not going to make sense right now, but it will make sense to you when you get into those situations in the real world. So what you're doing right now is you're preparing yourself, and that's always a good thing, because just being new does not absolve you from, oh my gosh, this person made a mistake. Well, yeah, because they're new, but it doesn't mean that you have to fall into that category. You can always study and do your best so that you can avoid those mistakes that normally happen to new people. You don't have to go through that. And that's why I'm glad you're here watching my channel, because this is advice that I wish somebody would have been able to give me when I started, because I started, on my own. As far as like with the school, they sat me in front of a computer and said, here, learn. And I learned on my own, and I didn't know anything about it. And I wasn't tech savvy to think about, going on YouTube back then. But now, there's so much information out there, and there's a lot of people sharing things on YouTube. And, my advice is very straightforward, because I want to set y'all up for success. I am not here to like coddle anybody, but I want y'all to be prepared, because once you get in that real world and you start working with those doctors, you have to be tough. You have to be tough in order to protect them. And of course you have to be respectful, but you have to, be able to protect them, even though they may not understand what you're doing. And the first step to doing that is knowing these guidelines, okay? So I'm gonna move on. All right, so there's 32 pages here. Now, if you want to take a few pages over a few days and stretch it out, that is totally fine. You do not have to read these all in one sitting, all right? Because it's informationally dense. Yes, it is. But again, if you read it and your brain starts to recognize it, you're going to go faster every single time, okay? So now I'm going to start on page 3 of the coding guidelines in the ICD-10-CM, Expert for Physicians from Optum. And it's starting off with section 1, and then it says conventions of ICD-10-CM. So then it starts breaking down like the alphabetical index and the format and the structure. But you will see as you go along, right? It talks about the punctuation and things. The punctuation is very important for you to know the difference because that difference in the parentheses and the difference in the brackets is going to make or break your accuracy if you don't understand what those things mean. So that is something that is very, very important for y'all to understand. So you'll go through those and it'll explain everything to you. And then it'll talk about, okay, so sometimes people ask me, what does, it says 1.A.13.B mean? What does that mean, Blue? Okay, so as you're looking at page 3, section 1, that's that 1. It says 1.A, which that means the section is the conventions of ICD-10-CM, right? Conventions for the ICD-10-CM. That's that second one, 1.A, and then you go down to 13. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes all the way to 13. 13, it says etiology/manifestation convention, code first, use additional code in diseases classified elsewhere. So if somebody wants to reference that, that's the way they would write it, 1.A.13. Now, if there's a subcategory, I want to say subcategory, but subparagraph A or B or C or whatever, then you would add on whichever one. So if you're looking at it again, 1.A.13, and that'll tell you right where to go. So that's how you know you go in that section. And when we turn the page, we see there's no other subsections. So we know if the person is quoting that, that's exactly where we go to see where they're quoting, okay? And when you are quoting something in the guidelines too, when you're in an audit, that's what you want to do, okay? So you see the next section there, when we flip the page to page 4, we see B for general coding guidelines, right? So if we wanted to quote something from here, let's say we wanted to quote number 3, okay? We would go section I, or section 1, I don't know why I say I. Section 1, we will put 1.B, right? General coding guidelines, point 3. That's how we would quote that, okay? And then it says right there, code or codes from A00.0 through T88.9, and then Z00 to Z99.8, and then U00 to U85. The appropriate code for or codes from A00.0 through T88.9, Z00 to Z99.8, and U00.85 must be used to identify diagnoses, symptoms, conditions, problems, or complaints, or other reasons for the encounter or visit. So it's telling you specifically right there to use codes to explain why the patient is having a visit. Okay, so that's exactly what it's saying here. Again, this book is very literal. So it is saying that that's the code range that you're going to use to describe the diagnoses or the reasons for the visit for that patient. You're going to use this book, and they give you the code ranges there. Okay, so again, it's very detailed, but that's how you would quote that. Okay, and so we keep moving along, and we see if you go to number 10, right? So you're in section B, and then you go down to 10 where it says Sequella. Sequella is my personal favorite. I love Sequella, even though there's a lot of people that say, I hate Sequella, Blue. Don't hate it. It is so awesome. With Sequella is telling us, like, when there's an injury and there's a manifestation, something is still occurring because of this injury, whether it is scar, whether it is pain, any of those things, whatever the case may be. And it could be a variety of things. So that's why I like it so much, especially when I see it in the documentation. I'm like, ooh, I see this. And there's a causal relationship, meaning that they're saying specifically that this is due to this. This is due to this injury that this patient had. And it could be from 20 years ago and they're still having pain from it. But that was an injury that was sustained 20 years ago, and it still is affecting this patient with pain, So that's when I was like, ooh, and then you find, how did it happen? Hopefully you have trained your providers to make sure they document how it happened. But if they don't, that's where you can step in. And that's when you can explain why external causes are so important to injuries. Doesn't matter when it happened, doesn't matter if it's a Sequella situation, doesn't matter if it's a current or if it's a follow-up deal as far as like the subsequent treatment. You still need to know what the external cause is. How did that injury happen? But before I get off into too much into that, I want to point out something here where it says 10, it says Sequella late effects. And then it's got a lot here. I'm going to read this really kind of quickly. A sequela is a residual effect, a condition produced after the acute phase of an illness or injury has terminated. There is no time limit when the Sequella code can be used. The residual may be apparent early, such as a cerebral infarction, or it may occur months or years later, such as due to a previous injury. Examples of sequelae include scar formation resulting from a burn, deviated septum due to a nasal fracture, and infertility due to tubal occlusion or from old tuberculosis. Coding of sequela generally requires two codes sequenced in the following order. The condition or the nature of the sequela is sequenced first, and then the sequela code is sequenced second. So it's always going to be like that injury. The injury code is going to go second with the S at the end, because that's going to say that this is a sequela, and the condition before it is going to be what was produced from it, either a scar or pain or anything like that. So know that the sequela code is never first listed. Never, 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 ever. It's always going to be the manifestation is going to be listed first, then the sequela. Okay? But when we go to the bottom, it says see section 1.C.9. So if we go back to the beginning, section 1.C, so we're at A, and then of course we're in B, and then we flip the page and we see C, right? So it says section 1.C.9, sequela of cerebrovascular disease. So we are in section 1.C.9. If you flip, where is it? I don't want to go too fast and miss it. Did I miss it? Hello. 7. So these are all subsections. So here we go. 1.C.9 is chapter 9, diseases of the circulatory system, I00 to I99, and then it starts off A with hypertension. So it's telling you when it's talking about sequela of cerebrovascular disease, you can hop there and you can see guidance about that. So it'll tell you about hypertension. It'll tell you about like all of these circulatory problems that could be sequela of cerebrovascular disease, right? So then it gives you all of the guidances about that, about hypertensive cerebrovascular disease, hypertensive retinopathy, and that is on page 14 and 15. So that's where it's talking about all the cerebrovascular disease issues, right? And then it says, the other one, it says C section 1.C.15. So when we do that, we go past here, and chapter 15 is on the next page, 18, is 1.C.15 is chapter 15, pregnancy, childbirth, and the puerperium. O, don't say 0. O00 through O9A. And then it talks about the general rules for obstetric cases. So that's how you can know how to hop around in the book, okay? So you just got to start at the first thing and then see the second thing and then go to that section, okay? And so then it tells us about like C section I.C.19 for application of 7th characters for chapter 19, which is our injury chapter. So when we look at that, I.C.19, we flip to page 22, which is chapter 19, injury, poisoning, and other certain other consequences of external causes. So then it starts talking about the application of the 7th character. So if we wanted to specifically cite the guideline that's talking about the application of the 7th digit character on an injury code, right, we would cite 1.C.19.A, because that's the first paragraph there, right? A it says application of 7th characters for chapter 19. It says most categories in chapter 19 have a 7th character requirement for each application of the code, right? Most categories in this chapter have 3 7th character values, with the exception of fractures, because fractures can be like open, and so it's going to have a different letter. Okay, so you'll see that in the book when you practice. But for the most part, it's going to be A, which is your initial, or, you know, they're being actively treated. D is for your subsequent treatment when they're in the healing phase. And S is for sequela. So then it goes on here to say A is for initial encounter, D is for subsequent encounter, and S is for sequela. Categories for traumatic fractures have additional 7th character values. While the patient may be seen by a new or different provider over the course of treatment for an injury, Assignment of the seventh character is based on whether the patient is undergoing active treatment and not whether the provider is seeing the patient for the first time. So that you have to be really paying attention to. So here's the deal. If a patient goes into the ER, right? And let's just say it's a sprain and the ER says, okay, we're going to wrap this up, but we're going to send you over to ortho. And so they get them stabilized, their sprain, they put it in a splint, and then they send them over to ortho. Ortho looks at it and says, you know what? It looks like you're doing fine. Everything looks okay. There doesn't appear to be anything. We did an x-ray and everything is fine. So you continue on with that splint and we'll see you back in a week. Well, that's the first time they're being seen in ortho, right? But they've already been seen over in the ER where they were actively being treated, where it was their first initial treatment for that sprain, and they stabilized the sprain with the application of a splint. But when they went over to ortho says, we don't need to do anything for you. You look like you're doing just fine. We're going to continue on with this splint. That, their first visit with ortho is not going to be initial, right? Because now the patient is in the healing phase. Ortho's not doing anything for that patient that came to them, and they're going to continue on with the splint. That's a subsequent. That is saying that the patient is in their healing phase, okay? Now, if, say, for instance, they say, oh, no, we've discovered that there's actually a fracture here. If they said something like that, and then they said, okay, now we have to cast this. A splint is not going to work. We need to cast this. So if they said that, that's active treatment. Of course, you would code for the fracture, but that's a whole completely different thing, and that's an initial for that patient because they discovered that fracture, and that's what they're treating. So that's the thing that you have to be able to recognize those things. All right, and so even if let's just say that they fractured it and they had gone to the ER. They say, okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and put you in this this temporary cast, and we'll send you over to ortho. So they get over to ortho, and ortho says, oh no, we need to take you up to the OR because we need to do surgery on this. We need to go in and do a much more sophisticated procedure like an ORIF, open reduction internal fixation. We need to go and do that. So they take the patient up and to the OR. That would still be an A because they are having to do active treatment on this patient. The patient is not in the healing phase yet of their fracture. They are having to have a surgery. So that is still being actively treated. It's not that they're in a subsequent phase, even though they've already, had this thing looked at by the ER. Ortho has to go in and do a surgery for it. So again, that's recognizing the differences between subsequent and of course an initial. So, but yeah, so that one you got to be really watchful for, because sometimes people think, well, no, this is the first time we've seen this patient, so we're going to code them with an A. So it doesn't really matter when it comes to the diagnosis. What matters, of course, what is in the outpatient setting, what is driving the visit and things like that, of course, is the E&M and, of course, the procedures. But when you think about it, well, some people erroneously think, oh, we get paid more money if it's an A. No. That's not the way that works. So it depends on what is happening with that patient. So you can't ever think about it, oh, just because of the money. Oh, just because of this. No. What phase of the healing is this patient in? That's what you have to think, okay? But you would know this, you would know all of this by reading and looking at those guidelines and reading those guidelines. So that way you're already aware. Because even though, like I said, even though you're new, it doesn't mean you have to make those rookie mistakes, right? If you've been reading and practicing and studying, that's your best bet, okay? So take this, take these guidelines, read them, read a section at a time if you want to, and then take a break. Read 15 minutes minimum, 30 minutes minimum, right? I say 15 or 30 minutes because An hour is too much, okay? 15 or 30 minutes and then take a break because your eyes are going to get tired. But read them, and you will get faster at reading, guys. You will. And it will start to make more sense to you. And the more that you can talk it out, and the more that you can discuss it, if you're in a class and you know that there's somebody like you that wants to study too, and you start talking about the guidelines back and forth and what they mean, and you explain to them and they explain to you, that's another really great way of learning these guidelines. So, of course, I'm already almost out of time. But I wanted to tell y'all, look on page 9. And you see all of these subcategories. It's the same thing. So every time you're going to cite a specific thing, just make sure that you go to the section 1 or section 2, section 1, dot B, dot C, you know, whatever. And so make sure that you do it that way. And that's how you can know what they're saying when they're telling you to look up certain guidances. Yeah. So even on page 11, M, like in Mary, current malignancy versus past history of malignancy. It talks about that. And then it says codes from subcategories Z85.0 through Z85.85 should be only assigned for the former site of a primary malignancy, not the site of a secondary malignancy. Code Z85.89 may be assigned for the former site of either primary or secondary malignancy. See section 1.C.21, factors influencing the health status and contact with health services history of. So that's where it's telling you to specifically go into the guidelines for there and read more about it. So, like I said, I'm about to run out of time. But that's how you spend time reading these. And guys, I do have my Patreon website if you are interested in that. That link is below. It is $10 a month minimum pledge. And we have our once a month study hall. So if you're interested in joining, you certainly don't have to pledge past a month, but the minimum pledge is $10 because you do get access to several worksheets and puzzles and all kinds of stuff that I do on that website. And plus, there's other videos about me, some private stuff that I don't share here on YouTube. So if you're interested in that, again, my link is in the description box below. But good luck on your studies, and remember to take your breaks, study hard, and I'll see y'all again on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody. If this video helped you, please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.